Hi, good afternoon. I'd like to thank Queens College for hosting this event and everyone who's worked on putting it together, and especially John Waldman, who was kind enough to ask me to speak. So my talk, as John mentioned, is titled Many a Neighborhood, Astoria to the Rockaways, and I will be discussing the myriad of neighborhoods you can find in America's would-be fourth largest city. Let's see if I got this. All right, okay. Now, you might wonder just how many neighborhoods exist in this enormous borough. And off the top of my head, I could probably name about 20, maybe 25 if I'm lucky. And while that's an impressive number, it turns out that it's not even close. It turns out that there are 74 neighborhoods, when you add them all up, to be found in Queens. 74 in total, from Astoria in the northwest corner to the Rockaways jutting below Brooklyn and Jamaica Bay. And for a lot of us out there, even the native Queensians among us, we probably haven't even scratched the surface of all there is to know about our home borough. So I'd like to say that I'm the definitive expert on Queens neighborhoods. I do have some expertise, and because I've traveled through a lot of Queens in my lifetime, and for that I can thank this lady. That's my mom, Susan Steinberg. I can't talk about Queens without talking about my mom because I owe just about all of my Queens knowledge to her. Sue, as everyone called her, was originally from the Bronx, and she moved to Queens with her family as a child. She attended Queens College for her degree and also Queensborough College for her master's. She was a teacher at Bayside High School for over 30 years, and in the latter part of her career, she worked as the Queens District Representative for the United Federation of Teachers, which meant that she was needed in every part of town. As a result, I have fond memories of doing my homework in empty conference rooms while my mom attended meetings in Lefrak City and Elmhurst, and sitting in the Bayside High Auditorium as she directed plays. Sue was a Queens maven, and she knew the place inside and out. Her family tagged along for the ride, me, born in Flushing's former Booth Memorial Hospital, and my dad, a transplant from South Brooklyn. He lives in Howard Beach now. I covered a lot of Queens ground when I was growing up. I lived on Junction Boulevard, the dividing line between Corona and Jackson Heights, right down the street from the Louis Armstrong School. And I went to school in Bayside and Flushing, Townsend Harris. I had my first date in Bay Terrace, and I spent a lot of time after school in Forest Hills and the Queens Center food court. My dentist was in Little Neck, and I attended summer camp in Fresh Meadows, and sometimes we went to the movies in Douglaston. That's right, we went from Jackson Heights all the way to Douglaston just to see a movie. Needless to say, I spent a lot of time in the back seat of my parents' car. After college, I returned to Queens, and I met a lot of newcomers to New York. Most were in my age category, and they considered Manhattan and Brooklyn the end-all, be-all, while Queens remained a mere footnote. Most had never ventured beyond a certain point on the 7 train, and some had never ventured at all. There was a stigma attached to the borough that I didn't understand. Maybe I was biased, but I thought that these folks didn't know what they were missing. So I decided to create a book about Queens, and the book wouldn't solely focus on the quote-unquote cool parts of Queens, that is, the parts that are easiest to get to from Manhattan. The result was this anthology, Forgotten Borough, Writers Come to Terms with Queens, the title a wink and a nod to the supposed stigma of living in or hailing from Queens. The book consists of a variety of voices and perspectives from those who have found themselves in Queens at some point during their lives. And while I was editing the book, my goal was to represent as much of Queens' vast geography as possible, from Astoria to the Rockaways and everywhere in between. And that's what I'm here to share with you today. And I'll be quoting from pieces in Forgotten Borough as I go along, and it's not just because I want to plug the book, which I do, Forgotten Borough, check it out from SUNY Press, available outside, but also because the writers in this book often put it in terms that I cannot hope to emulate. So to make this a little more interactive, so it's not just me talking at you, I've picked a few neighborhoods to explore on a little mini road trip. No one's ever had that idea before. And I'll give you hints as to where we're going each time. They're kind of cheesy hints, but if you recognize the neighborhood, call it out. So we're going to start with an easy one. So anybody want to guess which part of town this is? That's right. We begin with Long Island City, which was once upon a time an actual city founded in 1870 until 1898 when it became part of the city of Greater New York. The last mayor was a notorious Irishman named Patrick Jerome Battle Axe Gleason. The westernmost neighborhood to be found in Queens, many pass through Long Island City on their way from Manhattan via the 59th Street Bridge, aka the Queensboro Bridge, or the Ed Koch Queensboro Bridge, though some of us may never call it that. A major Long Island City landmark is the Silver Cup Studio sign, a throwback to when it was Silver Cup Bakery. The area is also home to the Citigroup building, which opened in 1990 and is the tallest building to be found on Long Island. Some of us can probably remember a time when we didn't ever think to visit Long Island City, and now we probably can't afford to live there. Once home to factories and industrial buildings, the neighborhood has experienced a residential boom over the past 20 years, with high-rise condos, restaurants, and bars popping up all over. It's also an artsy part of town, from PS1 MoMA to the Socrates Sculpture Park and the Isamu Noguchi Museum. 10 years ago, Long Island City even served as the Museum of Modern Art's temporary home base, located in the former Swing Line Stapler plant, a building that is now abandoned, a testament to New York's short-term memory. My favorite site in Long Island is the infamous 5 Points, an outdoor exhibition space that touts itself as the graffiti mecca of the world, which you can either visit or spy out the window of the 7 train right before you go underground. Unfortunately, 5 Points will likely be torn down by the end of this year to make room for more apartment buildings. So please check it out if you never have before it's gone for good. So above Long Island City is another culturally significant neighborhood. When I decided to do Forgotten Borough, I received a lot of interest from writers about Astoria, which is probably because so many writers live there. There are a couple of pieces in the book about life in Astoria, and they each mention Greek food, which I find both inevitable and hilarious. And I'd like to share this passage from Susan Chee's story, which underscores the old world meets hipster vibe that makes Astoria unique. If you ask, people will usually tell you about the Greek diners and pastry shops, the Bohemian beer garden on 24th Avenue, the hookah joints and gold-plated restaurants on Steinway. To me, Astoria is simply a place of old and young people. By old people, I mean the red-eyed elderly adjusting air conditioning units that blow dust all over their silver spoons. And as for the young, forget the teenagers and grade school kids. Imprinted in my memory are those of us who met up, crowding the Ditmars station, ready for the end to take us into the city. We were transplants. We were too excited to be here. Like Long Island City, Astoria is easy to get to from Manhattan, but a teensy bit farther away, so it stayed on the mostly affordable side. In turn, this has attracted a lot of young professionals and creative types, leading to the dichotomy that Susan Chee describes. While it's well known for its Greek fare, Astoria has also seen many other ethnic groups take root, including Italians, Lebanese, Jews, Egyptians, and Brazilians. It's the home of the piano company Steinway and Sons, founded in 1859, and Astoria was also once an epicenter of American filmmaking, and that heritage is preserved at the Museum of the Moving Image, located in a former building of Kaufman Astoria Studios. My favorite fun fact about Astoria is the origin of its name. It was originally called Hallett's Cove after its first landowner, William Hallett, who settled there in 1659. It was renamed Astoria after John Jacob Astor, then the wealthiest man in America with a net worth of over $40 million, in order to persuade him to invest money in the neighborhood, $2,000. He only invested $500, but the name stuck. Astor could gaze upon the village with his namesake across the East River from his home in Manhattan, but he never set one foot in Astoria. Here's the next one. Yeah, these are especially cheesy hints. It's an area that's very close to my heart because it's where I'm from, me and Ugly Betty. And, how great is it that we've heard all day, how Archie Bunker is sort of like the epitome of Queens and pop culture. And, decades later, this is the face of Queens and pop culture. So since I went to school in other neighborhoods, I didn't explore everything that Jackson Heights had to offer until I came back from college. And that's something I regret because Jackson Heights is teeming with culture, one of the most diverse residential areas in the entire country. Most of the original neighborhood is now a National Historic District, a planned development created in the early 1900s, believed to be the first garden city community built in the United States. When Jackson Heights' buildings went up, they were marketed as a lusher alternative to Manhattan, a place for middle-income workers to raise their families, and a spot for some wealthy New Yorkers to stash their mistresses. In the middle of the 20th century, other ethnic groups began to flock there, finding it a cheap place to settle down, close to nearby construction sites such as Shea Stadium and the World's Fair. And this is one of the reasons that Jackson Heights became the incredible melting pot it is today, as we've heard, attracting Colombians, Indians, Dominicans, and many, many more. So this may go without saying, but you can't talk about Queens without mentioning the food, and Jackson Heights has a lot to do with that. And that's the first thing I tell people who have never ventured to Queens. Good Lord, don't you know about the food? Molly McCloy contributed a piece to Forgotten Borough called Eating East Elmhurst, which paints a perfect picture of what it's like to live in or around the Jackson Heights neighborhood, right next door to all of that amazing food and the people who make it. She writes, "In Queens, I ate rotisserie chicken and ceviche at 8 Peruvian restaurants, sampled skirt steak with olive oil and herb chimichurri sauce at 3 Argentinian steakhouses, and I tried 3 types of flan, as well as churros stuffed with dulce de leche at the Paraguayan bakery. I ate sloppy tacos overstuffed with roast beef birria at taquerias. I neglected to try the Hungarian cafe, but I did some serious snacking at the Indian chat houses. The Mexican restaurants had menus in Spanish only and were filled with Mexican customers. Queens cooked for itself." Aren't you glad we just had lunch after that? Many well-known people call Jackson Heights home, including John Leguizamo, Lucy Liu, Howard Stern, and Alfred Butts, the man who invented Scrabble at his church. Home to one of the largest gay communities in New York, Jackson Heights also hosts a huge Pride Festival every year. And every now and then, the media seems to rediscover Jackson Heights and claim it as the untouched jewel of New York City. Take a New York Daily News article from 2009 entitled "Quaint in Queens," which quotes a woman who purposely chose the historic district when moving back to the East Coast. "I feel really lucky," she said. "I grew up in Manhattan, and if you had ever told me I'd be living in Queens, I'd have run screaming." Now we move on to our next one. What's that? Yeah, Jamaica, right. Home of 50 Cent. It was settled under Dutch rule in 1656 in New Netherland as Rustdorp, which is something you can't make up. It became Jamaica under British rule, though its name is completely unrelated to the Caribbean nation and instead derives from Jamaica, the name they gave to the local Native Americans. George Washington slept in colonial Jamaica in 1790, and Rufus King, a signer of the U.S. Constitution, relocated there in 1805. King Manor still stands today. Once an Irish immigrant stronghold, Jamaica is now mostly African American and growing more diverse with time. The neighborhood is home to West Indians, Sri Lankans, Bangladeshis, Filipinos, and many other groups that began to settle there in the latter part of the 20th century. After major retailers departed the area in the 1950s and 60s, the neighborhood suffered from high crime rates and a drug epidemic. Forgotten Borough contributor Jayanti Tam wrote about the years she spent in Jamaica as a member of a local cult and how easy it was to believe when surrounded by hardship. Rather than establishing his ashram in one of Queens's pockets of preen gentility, Forest Hills with its cobblestone courtyards and turrets, or the leafy Long Island sensibility of Douglaston, your God chose Jamaica as his dominion. Its disjointed houses stared blankly upon maroon shopping carts and the carcasses of burned, stripped cars, the drug-scarred streets and the continual wails and whines of car alarms. Jamaica's exorbitant crime rate solidified your total and absolute reliance on the guru to protect you. In recent years, things have improved as developers look to Jamaica for future investments. Jamaica Station was fully completed in 2003, solidifying the area as a major transportation hub and providing a direct ride to JFK International Airport. And let's not forget that the greater Jamaica area is also home to some of the biggest names in hip-hop, gifting us with such mega talents and moguls as 50 Cent, Nicki Minaj, Russell Simmons, and Run DMC, who once announced to the world, "It's Christmas time" in Hollis, Queens, officially putting the borough on the map as a birthplace of hip-hop. Someone else who was born in Jamaica? Donald Trump. But whether folks in Jamaica want to claim that guy is totally up to them. This next one might be a little harder to guess, but I have faith. Forest Hills and Rego Park, you're both right. Home to the Ramones, Art Garfunkel, and Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man, Forest Hills is an upper middle-class neighborhood with an especially swanky area contained within Forest Hills Gardens, which we've heard a lot about today, planned on the model of the garden communities of England. Next door, Rego Park has many apartment buildings and railroad homes. Both neighborhoods have been home to significant Jewish populations, something you can tell when walking down the main thoroughfare Queens Boulevard. Delis and bakeries can be found everywhere, as well as the occasional glatt kosher Chinese restaurant. Many Holocaust survivors settled in Rego Park after World War II, including the parents of cartoonist Art Spiegelman, author of the famous graphic novel Mouse. And Bukharan Jews from the former Soviet Union have arrived in recent years. To see their influence, you can look to the former Trilon Theater on Queens Boulevard, an Art Deco gem built in 1939 that closed 60 years later and now houses a Bukharan community center. Author Irina Rain contributed a story to Forgotten Borough called Koshé the Deathless, in which her young narrator navigates and describes her immigrant neighborhood. Yasha's International was the hub of all activity, butcher, grocer, and importer of familiar Russian and Polish canned goods. To get there, I passed hardware stores, clothing stores, cobblers and purse repairers, Central European psychics, Uzbek restaurants with large chunks of meat corpses rotating in the window. Even on a weekday, the street was a bustling mess of bodies, rushing from store to store as if preparing for the Last Judgment. Last but not least, we are heading way down south to the Rockaways. This is where we end our road trip, an area that contains a number of neighborhoods along the peninsula, including Bell Harbor, Breezy Point, Far Rockaway, and Rockaway Beach. It's been known as a popular summer resort area since as far back as 1830, when seaside hotels began to go up. The bungalow was the housing unit of choice in Rockaway until the mid-20th century, when recreational interest died down and developers arrived. For several decades, Rockaway seemed forgotten and crime pervaded. In recent years, however, Rockaway's popularity has resurged with new interest from a younger generation. As AM New York reported in summer 2012, the Rockaways have been dubbed a hipster Hamptons, emerging as a hot destination for people taking summer day trips. There's even a shuttle bus that goes between Williamsburg and Rockaway Beach, the Rockabus, as it's dubbed. Rockaway has endured its fair share of hardships over the years. In 1893, Hog Island, a small sandbar island off the coast of Far Rockaway, washed away in a storm. 1993 saw the Golden Venture disaster, during which 10 people drowned while trying to escape the beached ship. And in November 2011, an American Airlines flight crashed in Bell Harbor, killing hundreds. And, as we all know, Hurricane Sandy devastated the area in late 2012, resulting in major damage, as well as flooding and fires that wiped out hundreds of homes. Recovery is in sight as sand is replaced on the beaches and concession stands return, with a new boardwalk coming in the near future. Rockaway is as resilient as ever and remains a source of inspiration for all of us who live in and come from Queens. When I asked Jill Eisenstadt to contribute something about the Rockaways to Forgotten Borough, she gifted me with 4 sonnets written in tribute to the area. This one reads as even more poignant now in the wake of Hurricane Sandy and the events that followed. It's called The Naming. Call it Recho Heihaki, lonely place. We Canarsie can foresee such sadness. Fire, storm, shipwreck, crash, flood, whitecap lace, spell out SOS, SRO, madness. We will disappear with the deer, cedar, and oyster. Our shell mounds beneath the 5 towns. No shadow of our briny leader. Here Reese, Moses, and Joey Ramone thrive. Agreement in the longhouse. It's too much. German spies and drowned Chinese illegals. Best to trade this cursed strip to the fresh Dutch. Leave the coming plane wreckage to seagulls. Licked by water on 3 sides, the lost home does, by surviving, deserve this love poem. So, I'm going to go back. Well, I'd love to continue our road trip to every other neighborhood in Queens. Flushing and its wildly multicultural flair. Upscale Bayside and its former film star population. And Ridgewood, the new go-to area for cheap rents, though probably not for very long. I'm going to end the tour here and I will thank you very much for coming along for the ride. And I hope you'll feel inspired to visit one or more of these 74 jewels. Thanks.